Welcome to SOS Briefs, and here is your host, Senior Analyst, Mr. Laurence Sanford. How are you?
I'm fine, Jordan. Yourself?
Good, thank you.
Well, it's another day, and the Chinese continue to probe and test the United States in many areas, of course, with the balloon. But we're going to talk today about the gray zone. And the gray zone is basically actions by a party, and in this case, we're talking about China or the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, that use actions below the use of physical force. In other words, no shooting, but above normal diplomatic actions. And so the prime example is in seas surrounding China. There is the South China Sea and there's the East China Sea. The South China Sea extends down through until it reaches the Straits of Malacca at Singapore. So countries bordering the South China Sea are Vietnam, Philippines, parts of Taiwan, Indonesia, Brunei. And each one of these countries has an exclusive economic zone, EEZ. And basically these are 200 miles away from the nearest point of land that they own. And when all these countries' economic zones protrude into the South China Sea, there isn't much left. But that has not stopped the Chinese from introducing their own map. It's called the 9-dash line map. And the map extends all the way down towards Indonesia. And basically the Chinese are saying, everything within this border is ours, and your exclusive economic zone, Philippines, doesn't count because we control everything. And within the South China Sea, there are numerous shoals and small islands that the Chinese have built up into being basically military bases in the middle of the South China Sea. And of course, being communist, they lie. President Xi back in 2015 in Washington at the White House told President Obama that they would not militarize the shoals and islands of the South China Sea. And of course, it was a flat out lie, like so many other things coming out of the CCP. Satellite images are clearly shown they built up these islands and shoals to the extent where they have runways for planes, and they have bunkers, military bunkers, and so forth.
Well, Larry, I don't want you to give too much of your article away, so can you go right into the Chinese fishing fleet coercion?
Okay, and that's part of the South China Sea gray zone actions of China. And the Chinese fishing fleet consists of the smaller vessels, and there's anywhere from 5,000 to 200,000. No one knows. Chinese won't say anything, and if they do say anything, I always take it with a grain of salt. And then there's the other fleet, which is the long-range fleet, and that's the deep water fleet that goes all over the world. In South China Sea, these fishing fleet boats, many of them with steel hulls, as opposed to many of the locals, which are just basically little fishing boats. They come over and intimidate the local fishermen in the Philippines and Vietnam and Indonesia. And with their motherships, they just scoop up all the fish so that the local guys don't have much to fish from. And also, they intimidate them and drive them off the areas so that it's only Chinese in the South China Sea. And the far deep water fishing fleet goes all over the world. So they're scrounging in West Africa, taking harvest, and they come with these larger fishing vessels, but they also come with motherships. And the motherships are the ones that take the harvest from the smaller ones so that the smaller fishing boats can stay there. And one of the more outrageous actions that the fishing fleet did recently was off the coast of Peru and Ecuador in the Galapagos Island, which is an international zone of heritage. And they just scooped up thousands and tons of squid and smaller fish that are used to keep the habitat of the Galapagos going. So they have no qualms about going wherever they go in It's not an act of war, but if a little local boat gets in their way, beware, because they've sunk them in the South China Sea. They just ram them and sink them. So they're using this gray zone tactics, and accompanying these fishing fleets in many instances, the Chinese Coast Guard. And the Chinese Coast Guard ships have guns on them. They're militarized, and the Chinese have authorized Coast Guard to fire on boats that are violating Chinese territory. And so, since the South China Sea is Chinese perception of their property, any boat in their way is therefore liable to be shot at. So
it's no wonder the Bohemians didn't want the Chinese fishing in their seas there.
That's right too. You wrote an excellent several years ago about the Chinese, and
it was quite an outcry from the Bohemian people over that.
Yes. And of course, the Chinese, when they're trying to make inroads in this Belt and Road Initiative, and that's a subject for another day, one of the key factors is they do not have corruption laws. They are free to bribe and blackmail locals to their heart's content, whereas if an American corporation did that, the executives would be thrown in jail. So they have certain advantages of being a totalitarian dictatorship.
Point.
But that's
Thank you for that brief on the fishing points, and if you could brief us also on the air and space, sea space, I guess I should say, intimidation.
Well, that's best exemplified in the East China Sea. Now, the East China Sea is basically, if you look at a map, it's off the coast of China, where the South China Sea, not surprisingly, is south of China. But the East China Sea includes Taiwan. And Taiwan, the Chinese Communist Party claim, is part of China. And the Taiwanese government says we've been independent since 1949 and we are not part of China. The intellectual problem with that particular argument is that until 10 or 15, 20 years ago, Taiwan claimed to be part of China. Matter of fact, Taiwan claimed that China was part of Taiwan.
Yes, I recall.
And so there's a political angle that makes that a gray zone in a sense that it's a little fuzzy as to who's right, who's wrong. But in any event, Taiwan is independent. And I think if you're independent, the people want to stay independent, then probably they should be independent. It's never been under control of the CCP. Taiwan has never been under the control of the communists. So there's an argument to be made there also. But what the communists are doing, of course, is, it was highlighted when Speaker Pelosi visited Taiwan. They just are flying planes and ships intruding into Taiwanese airspace and sea space, intimidating them, saying that one of these days we're going to take over Taiwan. We're not going to say when or how or what, but we're coming. And the planes fly with impunity all over Taiwan and their seas. And they're doing the same thing, believe it or not, to Japan. There's a chain of islands south of Okinawa called the Senkakus. I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but the Chinese claim them also. And so Chinese ships, and Japan has controlled these islands forever. But China says, no, not forever. We used to have them back and whenever. And so the Chinese are constantly sending ships and boats into these islands currently controlled by China, claiming them to be theirs. And their Coast Guard ships are showing up there too. So that's a possible flashpoint. And back to the South China Sea, the Chinese harass U.S. Navy ships as they pass through the South China Sea. And the South China Sea has vast quantities of oil and gas, and $5 trillion worth of world trade pass through the South China Sea on the way to China and Japan and Korea. So it's a vital waterway,
yes.
And who controls it controls a chunk of the world economy.
And resources, right. Yeah, well, thank you for that brief on that. And Alan Dowd and I, our senior fellow, were talking about the same thing on Japan there, and them now building up their military to deter China. And you speak briefly in give us a little brief here again on final part of your brief. Peace through strength is the deterrence.
Absolutely. That's the motto of the American Security Council Foundation. Our mission is to educate Americans on economic security. And economic security, military security, and moral leadership. And you cannot have peace without strength. If you're weak, the powerful will take advantage of it. And we believe that we should have a strong military and that we should make sure that the military includes, of course, economic well-being, but it includes not only ships and planes, but cybersecurity,
Absolutely.
space security, moral security. There's a whole range of areas that when we talk about security and strength, we should have strength. And the United States, I would have to say, right now is very much in a divided area as far as where we are and where we should be heading. And our current military, I wrote a paper called Paper Tigers, and I think our military is weakened by all the wokeness and anti-race theory that's being promulgated. And so instead of talking red, white, and blue, we're talking black, brown, red, whatever. So I think we have some issues that should be addressed more so than just the number of ships and number of planes and number of soldiers.
True. And the Chinese are not having that issue, so they're continuing to build and use the gray zone.
Yeah. Well, it's just a balloon, right? The balloon that flew over us.
Exactly.
That's not an act of war, but it could be an act of war real easy if they had some stuff on board that balloon, which is pretty significant in size.
Well, as you mentioned in the beginning, it certainly is a tactic that they're using as a coercive act that's not just shy of armed conflict.
Yes. Yeah. So it's another gray zone tactic, and we can talk about gray zone tactics and their infiltration of the university systems and their blackmailing and bribing of the elite, Hunter Biden being a prime example.
Well, Larry, we'll have to do a full podcast on that one. So thank you for your SOS brief today.
Okay, my pleasure.
And for our listeners, you can read Larry's full article on our website at www.ascf.us. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Rumble channel at ASCF US. And stay tuned, as Mr. Sanford was talking about, our BRI series that we will be coming out with shortly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Joey.
Have a good day, everyone.